there's a political calculation here about Beto O'Rourke getting into the race. And between him and Biden, this is going to most likely help Bernie Sanders. The only real competition in the progressive lane is between Sanders and Warren, and then to some extent, Gabbard. And there is a massive, from the center out to the right, I would say genuinely center-left candidate with some very right-wing streaks in her record, like a Kamala Harris. And then there's, Amy Klobuchar running as a less charismatic version of Howard Schultz, with a worse organizational culture. Then, you have other candidates. And so, in that lane, Beto and Biden would really fill it out. And I guess the first takeaway that we have in this office is, one, in all seriousness, Beto O'Rourke's cool in some ways. He should run for Senate. He has buy-in in his home state. As a national Democrat, his voting record, and these measurements can be kind of silly, but the reality is that, leaving aside the fact, Bernie Sanders, a serious, committed leader for his whole political life, Elizabeth Warren, a serious, committed leader and policymaker, and then people like Harris, who've taken the lead on certain things in the Senate, Cory Booker, who's done great things on the drug war in the Senate. Beto votes well to the right of his Democratic colleagues. Now, that's not a problem when you're running statewide for the Senate in Texas, but why on earth would that be what the Democratic Party would want to go for in a time of that, the crisis of inequality, the crisis of ecology, and the need to not only have this broad-based Democratic coalition, but actually see it represented at the highest levels? He doesn't tick any of those metrics. The only thing he ticks is definitely for the best Obama impersonation in the race. And here he is. Look, we'll see if this gets filled in, but he is very much in the lane of, and I don't know if we're going to play his announcement video, but his announcement video has nothing specific. And one could come away thinking, whoa, he's talking about universal health care. He's talking about reparations. He's talking about immigration. He's talking about ending war. There's nothing in it. And this isolated clip, whoa, boy. It's as Matt, what did you say after you saw this clip about the soundtrack?
Oh, it's like you can hear the sort of swelling inspirational music they're going to put in the ad underneath it when they use it for media later.
Right.
But these challenges, I'm absolutely convinced, will bring out the absolute best in every single one of us. And we have something that almost no other country in the world has. We have the single greatest mechanism to call forth the genius of our fellow human beings. This democracy, more than 320 million people strong, can bring the ingenuity, the creativity, the resolve of an entire country. And each one of these challenges can and will be met. But the foundational challenge to get all of this done is to fix our democracy. Only when it works, and only when each one of us can work within it, will we be able to meet these threats. And so this setting right now, the very first event of our campaign for president, is an example not only of the way that I wish to campaign across this country for every single American, and I could care less your party persuasion, your religion, anything other than the fact that right now we are all Americans and we are all human beings, and we do everything within our power for one another, for this great country, and for every generation that follows.
I don't think so.
So, he's not going to cut in to Bernie Sanders' vote share. Some early polls might show that, but there's a very basic distinction at work here. if you honestly believe, and I understand, I agree. I've been saying it for a long time. Bernie Sanders definitely has a certain type of grandpa charisma. And like all politics today, there's unhealthy personality cults that can form in pockets around any candidate. And we should, try to disrupt that wherever we find it. In fact, most especially amongst candidates we support. But if you honestly think, if you're delusional enough to think that the young people, the people from every category of the society who finally responded to a candidate saying, look, the fact that there is no universal health care here, the fact that these companies are so predatory and so vicious, the fact that almost every category of life is getting more difficult for more and more people, and I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to name names, and I'm going to take action. If you think that that's personality that can get undermined by some, nice guy in a skateboard, I don't know how to put this politely. You're hugely divorced from reality. If you think that Bernie Sanders came out and gave that speech and so and that's why it's a democracy, and here's more pablum, and here's other vague points, and here's things that actually in some ways borderline offensively erase a huge amount of American history because it hasn't been a real democracy in actually ever, if we go back from the disenfranchisement of women to American apartheid to even today, the Princeton studies saying that this country is actually functionally an oligarchy. But I'm going to do generic, vague West Wing reference monologues and try to do an impersonation of Barack Obama. And people would have said, oh my God, you know what? I don't care. I don't care what Bernie Sanders' policy record is. It's just that pure, raw charisma. It's a delusional argument, and it reveals why you would be interested in Beto. Because there's no policy argument for Beto. There's no political argument for Beto.
He hasn't even tried to make one yet.
He hasn't even tried to make one. And there's also, by the way, and again, we usually have this fight, and I make no bones about it. At the end of the day, the policy is what's most important. But obviously we recognize the hugely important need. It's not the overriding need, obviously, in my view, but the need to have a woman president, to have more people of color, to have a Latino president, and so on. He doesn't bring, I get that he's impersonating Obama, but he certainly does not bring that to the table. He is literally a rich white guy. And I will add rich to the moniker, and not Jewish, and not someone who grew up in poverty, and not someone who came from immigrants, and not somebody who's a lifelong activist. He's a nice suburban dad whose wife is totally loaded from real estate investments, who has a unusually right-wing voting record for a Democrat in Congress. And by the way, his district he represents is a Democratic district. So it's not because it's a Texas swing. And he's also, Bernie Sanders, oh my God, he's an independent. Bernie Sanders has never stayed out of a race specifically to protect a personal friend of his who's a Republican. And by the way, this is one of these moments where a broken clock, and literally this broken clock might actually be a great way of describing Brian Kilmeade, is right every once in a while. This is Brian Kilmeade on Fox News.
All right, so Vanity Fair has a huge article and feature on him. It's almost as if they helped launch his campaign. Here's a quote from it. He says, I want to be in it, man. I'm just born to be in it. They also point out
I'm sorry. Could you imagine? Look.
I'm just born to be this.
Literally. And again, I don't want to be hypocritical, and I'm someone who really is like, let's not focus on every little gaffe and let's not be super petty, but Bernie is a mission-driven politician. And then, so he would not, and he's also Jewish and he's also coming from poverty. Okay, so that's the clear one. But could you be Kamala Harris and say that? Literally you couldn't, because of the history and politics of this country. In fact, you could say, actually, because of the structures of this country in terms of inequity, I was born to not do this, if we're being blunt about it, and I'm fighting to overcome that. And if you combine that, look, again, this is the type of thing that if he said that and he had rolled out a series of serious policy proposals and his record matched it, then I'm not going to be petty about that quote. But if it's a conservative voting record in Congress relative to the rest of the Democratic Party and no proposals and vacuous nonsense, that the raw narcissism of that quote is going to stick out to me. But let's go.
Be in it, man. I'm just born to be in it. They also point out that he has this huge library, as if it's a big plus that he reads books. We would assume that. And he talks to all the presidential libraries there, and the writer writes, there's always a sense that he belongs on that, as if a book of a president's going to be in there. But listen, he's got a lot of charisma. He's got a lot of presence.
Get him, Brian.
Yeah, that detail about like he has a library, it does seem like the people who on dating sites put that John Waters quote where if you go back to somebody's apartment and they don't have books, don't screw them, but
right.
they like only might read like one book all year, but they keep it out on their
I keep
coffee table.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
They keep it.
No, I was just.
Yeah, no.
I keep meaning to finish the new Jim Crow. You know what it is? He's got the new Jim Crow, but what he's really doing is rereading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People for the 8th time.
Reads that like Laws of Power book.
Laws of Power book is too cool. But I think, we'll see. And it's funny, like I'm not. Strategically, I think he actually helps Bernie, and I don't have any. I've liked and supported Beto, obviously, in his Senate run, so I'm trying to identify what annoys me so much about this. But I just think that there is something about just the raw, just mediocrity and entitlement of it all, and then the fact that all sorts of people, I'll say both who will smear and slime and lie about Bernie all day, and then all of a sudden will actually literally embrace just the total generic white male. And then also combined with just the fact that the much more important point, which is like, guys, like this is in fact a really serious time, like a really serious time. And my argument for making a structural change in this campaign and our policy has never hinged on only Bernie can beat Trump. I think it's a ludicrous argument. And a lot will change in a year. And God forbid we might be in a situation where Trump's super formidable. I don't really see it. I think what's most likely is I think basically everybody, and I mean this honestly, maybe Amy Klobuchar. I'm not really sure about her. But I think pretty much any of these candidates could defeat Donald Trump. Sanders, Warren, Harris, Booker, Biden. I really do. So my argument does not hinge on that. But my argument actually hinges on a longer view, which is that, okay, we've stopped the emergency. We've got rid of this buffoon, disgusting, grotesque jackass as president. But what's next, guys? Like, the global crisis we're in does not just hinge on a few disgusting personalities. There is a reason why from Brazil to India, to Russia, to Hungary, to the United States, to the Philippines, to Israel, to, I would actually just include the UK straight up. There is a authoritarian leaning, if not overtly fully so, unbelievably xenophobic, far right to fascist politics. And I don't know all the answers, but I know that some of the answer is going to have to come from some form of like real serious cultural and moral, but also economic and strategic answer to this. So, the year's 2022 and all of the trend lines are still bad. Maybe there's been some decent reforms put in place, but Beto O'Rourke is not doing anything structural for the economy. He's not doing anything structural on climate. And I'm not going to give you some vague, I'm not going to say like, what about the next Trump? Maybe worse. I don't know. There might not be anybody who's as bad as Trump. But even just the gridlock of insufficient and counterproductive neoliberalism with a party, or Republicans will still exist as a party. It will still be a oligarch white supremacy unity party. I don't know how much longer that dynamic is hugely destructive and incapable of dealing with the horizon of things like climate. So I just find, this whole, really? We haven't moved beyond this. Like, we already had the guy who did. Barack Obama is the best politician of not only his generation, but probably modern American history. And there was a time in some ways, and I make this argument to my leftist friends all the time, like, you cannot discount the unbelievable cultural and leadership qualities of President Obama and what he did, just even having him there in office. And then, again, I won't lie and cover for the profoundly insufficient and bad policies with regards to Wall Street or drones, for that matter, as well as giving credit for where he did move the ball forward. But, like, we did that. We're going to do the Coke Zero version of that. Why exactly?
Anybody, if you get into an argument with somebody who's a Beto supporter and they're not, you don't want to bring up Bernie, why would you support Beto and not Buttigieg? Buttigieg's way better than, if you're talking about young white guys. Policy-wise, identity-wise, he's just better.
He's an openly gay man. That's hugely significant. And you know what? He is a brilliant technocrat. But guess what? He said, everything I've heard from him is, I think he's for Medicare for all. Yep. He said John Bolton shouldn't be anywhere near the Situation Room. We need to pack the court. We need to get rid of the filibuster. He's putting points on the board.
Yeah.
And he would make his own form of quite significant history.
Yep. Let's see Beto do any of those things that Buttigieg himself is doing. Then we can start talking about if he competes with Bernie Sanders.
Well, he's
Absolutely.
just not as charismatic, Matt, is the problem.
Yeah, okay.
There it is. All right, folks.